Who are you? What are you made of? Where are you going? What will you make of yourself? Sometimes the hardest questions are the ones you ask yourself. If you're lucky, your answers are easy to find. If you're smart, you'll start looking here at one of our 23 community colleges and more than 40 locations. To learn more, visit findyouranswer.com. Find your answer at Virginia's community colleges.
This podcast of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs is sponsored by AAA Heating and Air.
The premier HVAC company in the Midlands is growing. Are you a top HVAC technician?
AAA Heating and Air is looking for dedicated applicants to fill their fast-growing service department with top-notch HVAC technicians.
If you're the best, then they want you. If you're ready to stop working and start a career, you can earn up to $100,000 plus a year at AAA Heating and Air.
Quality candidates will have at least 2 years experience and a good driving record. Benefits include top industry salaries, commission on service and unit sales, set call limits, company-provided take-home vehicle and gas card, company-provided cell phone and tablet, health, dental, and vision benefits, 401k retirement plan with company match, and scaled PTO based on length of service.
Contact Roy and Dana Finley at 803-677-1500 or check out their job postings on Facebook or ZipRecruiter.
AAA Air when you need us. AAA Heating and Air.
It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour with Chris Clark, Wes Mitchell, and Tyler Head on your home of the Gamecocks in Columbia. 107.5 The Game on 100.3 The Game in Myrtle Beach and 100.5 The Game in Florence.
My baby says you're traveling on the one after 9.
Well, welcome in to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour, presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game. Tyler, Wes, and Chris, along with you on this Wednesday morning, halfway through the week, inching closer to South Carolina and Mississippi State. Coming up Saturday night at 7:30 in Williams-Brice Stadium. Of course, Coach Beamer speaking to the media yesterday at 1:30, as he does every Tuesday, which we bring to you right here on The Game, brought to you by Pete Alewine Pools and Spas. And one of the first things that Coach Beamer talked about, something that we all figured to be true, no juice wells for this weekend, as he did re-aggravate his foot injury on Saturday against Georgia. So out for this weekend, but there's hope he will not be out too long, and you can get him back hopefully soon, maybe by the bye week, to return for that Florida game. But definitely something you didn't want to hear, but up to this point, South Carolina's been playing without him for most of the season anyway, so I don't think that changes too much of what you do on offense.
Yeah, like we talked about probably yesterday. I mean, you just hate it for Juice. Nobody really expected him to be able to play this week. I think there was a fear that this could be a long-term thing. So the fact that, it's something they will monitor. He'll be out this week, see where it is next week. You've got a bye week not that far ahead from you either. So, I think this is about the best case scenario there for Juice. And, you just hate it for him. Honestly, mentally, he was a guy that, as Dal Loggins said, he was kind of fighting through it just to get back, had worked really hard to get there, and hate it for him. As far as the team itself, like you said, Tyler, like you could always use a Juice Wells. And I think, I had made the comment, hey, if you have a healthy Juice Wells, a healthy AB, who I think has been right on the verge of breaking out, and then Leggett breaking out, combined with the guys who have kind of filled in behind them, you probably have one of the better receiver groups that we've seen at South Carolina if all those guys are healthy. As it is, no Juice Wells right now. AB's been banged up. Leggett's having to sort of carry the load there. And I think for them, the positive side of this is that you have had, Omega Blake has played a bunch. They'll keep bringing Nick Harbor along. Eddie Lewis has played a bunch in that slot spot. Luke Doty has played a bunch in there. So they have had guys step up in Juice Wells' absence, which obviously has been big. But, frankly, you'd love to have two dynamic outside wide receivers, which is what you would have with Leggett and Juice Wells.
The good news, I think, is that a couple pieces of good news. One, it looks feasible that you can get Juice back at some point. Tyler, I think when you said, getting him back around the bye week or Florida, that may be a little optimistic, maybe. But we'll see. I mean, with this type of thing, it's obviously a little bit touch and go. It's kind of difficult to figure out which direction it may go, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Nobody can sit here and say, in 2 weeks, in 4 weeks, he'll definitely be good to go. We don't know.
Sure.
We don't know. But to have the opportunity to possibly get him back, I think is going to be good. The important thing is probably, he's going to have to be just shut down. Like you've got to heal this thing up, and then if and when he is able to return, you get him back on the field and make sure he's completely good to go and that you don't have any questions there. Wes, to your point about it's tough not having your full complement of guys. That was going to be it still has been the strength of this team, right? Spencer Rattler throwing to these wide receivers. Xavier Legette has obviously, as we've mentioned, been in the best form of his career by far. And Amarian Brown through 2 games looked in the best form of his career. I think it's easy to forget he had a great season as a freshman at Georgia Tech.
Right.
Transfers to South Carolina. Things have not gone completely according to plan. He's had some flashes, right? And we know he's got a lot of speed. Dowell Loggins seems to really like him. And I think they've kind of unlocked through the first 2 games a really, smart way to use him, getting him in space. He's looked dangerous. But then, of course, you didn't have him or Juice. I mean, you had Juice for 10 plays for the Georgia game. But I do think as the week progresses, the odds favor getting AB back. And you need him, particularly with Juice out.
Yeah, and Coach Beamer did say, in regards to AB as well as Tyreek Johnson and JT Gear, who we have not seen this week, and those guys still questionable, but the optimism that they can all play this Saturday is pretty decent as we stand right now, halfway through the week.
Yeah, and a lot of these injuries, I know fans get frustrated about this stuff. We got to remember it's they're all day to day, and it can feel one way one day, and then go injure yourself, and
please don't.
But
theoretically,
not literally. They're smarter than that.
Wes Mitchell does not condone you injuring yourself.
There you go. There's our legal disclaimer there. But no, seriously, anybody's ever hurt themselves, and I know they got way better medical care than you or I do at home. But
right.
When's this thing gonna feel better? I think it'll be better tomorrow. And then you wake up tomorrow, it doesn't feel better. Or sometimes you think you're hurt, and you're like, oh, I feel great. Like, I'm fine. So, I think everybody heals differently. Every injury is a little bit different. And that's why we have these windows, 3 to 6 weeks or whatever it may be. So, I know fans get a little frustrated. I keep seeing people bring up the Marquis Anderson thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, some injuries you go ahead and have. There are treatment options, right? Originally, the option and the hope was that he was going to be able to play through and just get better through treatment. Well, it didn't respond to treatment. There were no options. So then you say, all right, we're going to shut him down. So they have nothing to gain from lying about Marquis Anderson, who has not played a snap yet.
Right.
Like that wasn't gamesmanship. That wasn't trying to, give wrong information. The information just changed, and that's fine. So, I get it. I get the frustration with injury reports, but these things are day-to-day. You have to keep sort of monitoring it. And I just think with AB and any guy that's dealing with a lower body injury or dealing with a hamstring injury, anything like that, it can feel good. Hamstrings in particular, they feel just fine when you're sitting there. And then when you really test it, you may find out, it's not quite where I want it to be. And one final point, Chris. These guys want to play, right? Like, they are competitors. They're not used to being hurt. Like, they want to be out there. They want to go compete and show what they can do. And, sometimes they can, sometimes they can't.
Yeah, I mean, I had a fan ask me a question yesterday on the Insiders Forum, one of our members, and basically was expressing some frustration, Wes, about what you said about the injury situation and how, it seems like maybe we don't have a handle on some of those things. And I answered the question the best I could, and he came back and said, I'm just a little frustrated by it, so I just had kind of a salty post about it. Like he admitted, like, to his credit, he was like, it's not really, we're hearing, all these different players are one thing and then it turns out to be something else. The other thing is, this does happen other places. Like that's a trick that you get played on you sometimes. South Carolina is the only school that this happens at, whatever the particular thing is, and injury's one of them. I mean, I'm going over Georgia's injury list right now. They got 15 guys that are either out, like they have a guy out for the season. They have a few guys that are straight up out. A few of them happened in the South Carolina game. And then they have, let's count them up, 3 guys that are doubtful, 5 that are questionable, and 2 that are probable. And so out of all those guys that I just listed, what's that, 7, 8, 9, 10 guys, those could kind of go either way. So sometimes you are going to hear, hey, we're hopeful that a guy can play, and then you go throughout the week and he either, continues down that positive trajectory or he doesn't sometimes. And you're right, man, with a hamstring. So I actually just talked to Marion Brown last night. We recorded a Garnet Trust-sponsored interview for Gamecock Central, and he was talking about this week and just sleep, being the number one thing, hydration, making sure that you're eating, make sure you're drinking enough water, and then going out there and just doing what you need to do during practice. He'll probably do, obviously, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the biggest days, the biggest days in terms of volume during practice. He's going to try to do some stuff today, and then we'll see, how it progresses throughout the rest of this week. And then, like you said, Wes, when you get in a game situation, that's when you're straining the most, and things can always happen. So hopefully for the Gamecocks, hopefully for him, things will progress well the rest of this week.
I think it's funny that we spent a lot of time yesterday tampering people's expectations about Nick Harbor, and then Coach Beamer specifically said yesterday, yes, we need to get Nick Harbor more involved in the offense.
Yeah, he did. Coaches say stuff like that a lot.
Sure. Which he's been on the field. We've noted that. He just has not been getting open to catch passes.
Yes. Where's the outcry for Tyshawn Russell from everyone?
He mentioned Tyshawn Russell as well, but
that's what I'm saying.
He wasn't a 5-star, though.
I was going to say, Nick Harbor is the shiny object here. And Tyshawn Russell, shiny, but not as shiny as Nick Harbor.
But going to be a pretty good player, I think.
Definitely so.
So, and Beamer said that about the defense as well. Hey, we got to play these young guys. Coaches say stuff like that all the time. I've said it several times. I think we will start to see. We already have seen the beginning of the youth movement, really starting with Furman. When you play the number one team in the country at their place, coaches sort of restrict their rotation. They kind of tend to go with the guys that have played, the guys that have been there before. Then as a season progresses, either by just absolute need because somebody gets banged up, or because you sort of those guys come along, they keep progressing, and you just realize, hey, we can't play the same players every single snap of every single game. So that's when the young guys continue to come along. So it's noteworthy when Beamer says that. But, Beamer also said, hey, so we got to play some of the freshmen more. But then he also, paraphrasing here, said, the freshmen have to keep coming along as well as far as their development.
Like Nick Harbor, let's not mistake it for when they hit the field on Saturday night, Nick Harbor's probably not going to play more snaps than Omega Blake, right? Especially with the game that Omega had against Georgia. I mean, could I be wrong? Maybe, but I don't think so, right? So getting those guys on the field more, getting them more opportunities, that doesn't mean, okay, they're playing 50 snaps a game now. It doesn't mean that, if you're a depth chart watcher, right now Juice is still number one on the depth chart. He's obviously not playing this week, and Nick is right behind him. That doesn't mean Nick is stepping in and starting. It's finding your best guy. So you look back at the North Carolina game, who stepped up when Juice was not on the field. Omega Blake played a lot, and he has, more experience. He's been around this program for a while, and he's had some nice production at times, whether it's in practice situations or in the game like we saw against Georgia.
I also think, guys, for our depth chart watchers out there, which I respect the game. I love a good depth chart myself.
We love depth charts.
Here's the thing on the depth chart. The depth chart that is put out publicly is 1 week behind.
Yeah.
You're not, even though it comes out on Monday, Big Tree was not listed as starting left tackle against Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Then obviously he was the starter. So then this week, now he's the starter at left tackle. So whatever changes you are going to see made, unless there's a season-ending injury, Beamer does at least give us enough to take those out. There was a time under a previous coaching staff that will remain unnamed where there is a player that's injured for the entire season, and they're still listed on the depth chart. It was just the same depth chart. It was just a default depth chart.
Right.
This is more than that. But for the most part, you kind of see what happened the previous week, I guess, represented in the depth chart compared. They're not going to break any news on Monday afternoon
right.
with the depth chart.
As you mentioned, Tree Babalade was in this week's depth chart as he's starting left tackle. He spoke to the media yesterday as well. We'll hear a little bit about what he had to say in his first impressions of playing in the SEC coming up. You're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
You loved Lala Kent on Vanderpump Rules. Now get to know her on Give Them Lala.
The Gen Zers, they love to be Gen Z, are calling Margot Robbie mid. On what planet is Margot Robbie a mid? Who's judging this? Are women judging it? The forward haircuts?
Yeah. Don't bring my people into this. The people with the foreheads, babe.
We all agree that she's a 10?
Yes.
Give Them Lala wherever you listen.
This episode is brought to you by Southern Company. Southern Company is making energy clean, smart, and sustainable for their 9 million customers across the country. Southern Company, building the future of energy. Learn more at southerncompany.com/future.
The SEC, we know, is the hottest league. We know that's where the best of best. That's what NFL coaches, all them look at. I won't say I was really surprised about anything. I mean, I know there was a good D-line I was going against. I give them respect. They're good. But, I came from a Catholic, DMV kids were very good. So it was like just stepping up to the next stuff. That's pretty much it.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris with you here on the game. That was the voice of Tree Babalade talking about his first start going up against the number one team in the country in Georgia this past Saturday in Athens. And you guys are obviously very familiar with Tree through the recruiting process and everything. Confident kid.
Yeah, and has been for a while, I think. And so Tree, how important, Chris, that South Carolina kind of stayed the course. A lot of people may forget. Tree commits. Really, this is they've recruited the offensive line the last couple of years so well. Huge credit to all those guys. Lonnie Teasley, Greg Atkins, Sam Serbay, Taylor Edwards, whole crew over there. They've recruited so well in the offensive line. And Tree was one of those guys where they got in on him early, got him in, I think, for a spring game a couple years ago, and, put themselves in position, then they landed the commitment. Then he decommits down the stretch, and you're like, man, that could be a huge loss for them. They stayed the course, got him right back in the boat, and obviously now he's locked down that starting left tackle spot. I don't really see that changing this year. I think you're ready to just roll with him there, and I think this kid's going to be a fan favorite. Great personality, larger than life, obviously as a human being. Yeah, literally, and so I'm excited for him. And if you listen to Spencer Rattler talk yesterday, he also put the best label on Tree. Y'all know it's my favorite label for a guy. Said he's a dude. So if Spencer Rattler says Tree's a dude, then I think that's a pretty good cosign.
Now, what's the correlation between a dude and football guy? One and the same, close together? How do we define that?
Nah. Not in my opinion.
Yeah, I think they're different.
Yeah, dude.
Does
is
dude become
better.
Football guy, or football guy can become dude?
Nah, football guy is just hard-nosed, smart, savvy. You don't need, in my opinion, you don't even have to be a good player, a great player.
Okay.
You got to be a pretty good player.
You got to be a pretty good player.
I don't think you have to be a good athlete to be football guy.
You can be football guy from first guy in, last guy to leave the gym kind of thing, but you're still the third string tight end. You know what I mean? You can be a football guy that way. That makes sense.
And a football guy, you can also be a coach and be a football guy.
That's true.
So a dude is like, that guy is good. You know it when you see it.
Your teammates know who's a dude.
Yeah.
And it's probably pretty obvious. That guy's a dude.
Yeah, there's not even, is he a dude or no? No, it's just
like when J.C. Horn showed up in Columbia as a true freshman and walked into the building, everybody was like, "Oh man, that guy's a dude."
Well, I remember seeing J.C. remember we were at that Rivals camp in Atlanta, and Trevor Lawrence is throwing, and there's a bunch of dudes on the field, and I saw J.C. and J.C. he still was not that highly ranked of a guy. Like, if you go look at, the industry, there's some places that had him, low-ish. And even if even as a top 200 guy, that's way too low for him. And I was just watching him, and I'm like, this guy is unbelievable. I mean, he's one of the best corner prospects I thought I'd ever seen. So he's kind of undervalued, but clear dude.
Tree a dude. Spencer's a dude. Leggett, dude.
Yep. You got some? Juice?
Trevon a dude.
We'll see.
Trevon apparently drives Tree everywhere, by the way. We learned that yesterday because Tree does not drive.
I would absolutely love. We need to do one of those car ride-alongs with those two. Tree and Tro.
Comedians in cars getting coffee.
So Tro was asked the question, I think by Colin, what's the strangest place you've ever had to drive Tree? And he immediately went, next question. So there's probably a good story there.
I saw that. I heard that. I
have to get the answer in a Garnet Trust interview. Unsanctioned interview.
Garnet Trust After Dark.
I don't, to your point, Wes, though, about how big of a get he was, I think we knew in recruiting, this is a guy they need. And remember when he decommitted, it seemed like big loss, right? I don't know if we knew in the short term that it would be this important, though. Did anybody have pegged? Yeah, Tree will probably be a starter at left tackle within the first 3 games of the season. Now, obviously, there's some circumstances that have accelerated that. If Jalen Nichols is still healthy, Jalen Nichols would probably be a starter at left tackle. And maybe Tree's playing somewhere else. Maybe he's playing right tackle. Who knows? So there are some circumstances there. But, man, I think this kid has probably, if we were to sit here and put truth serum on some of the coaching staff, I think they would probably say that he's been even better than expected, even sooner than expected, which, credit him for that.
Yeah, I think at the time you would have been saying this is a loss just based on the potential, on the upside. You wouldn't have necessarily been, and at the time you thought you'd have Jalen Nichols. So, but at the time you wouldn't have said, all right, this will be a loss for the 2023 South Carolina Gamecocks, which, frankly, man, they've needed it. And I think some of this is highly based on circumstance, but credit to Tree for stepping up, and he's only going to get better. And I think the exciting part for him and this team and the fans is that that sort of process is going to be accelerated immensely because he has no choice, because he's just going to go play, and there's going to be some mistakes. There'll be some issues. That's fine. You go back out there and learn from it. And I think he's got the mindset to go do it.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see, obviously, baptism by fire going out there against a team like Georgia's first time out. Obviously graded out pretty well, especially when it came to pass protection. And you feel like it's a much more favorable matchup this weekend against Mississippi State, a team that has struggled a little bit more when it comes to getting to the quarterback.
Yeah, and we'll, as the week goes on, we'll go into this Mississippi State scheme. I think it's a different test this week for South Carolina. Georgia is just, man, these guys are all 4- and 5-star recruits. Most of them guys that have been around a little bit, played some ball. Mississippi State, it's an interesting scheme. And so I think there's some mental aspects here where you're probably going to see some things you didn't see in high school. Really, this entire offensive line has struggled by the fact they have not been able to get the exact same 5 out there on a consistent basis. So passing off blitzers is a 3-3-5 defense that it's kind of unique compared to most schemes you play against, and I think that could be a factor for South Carolina this week.
Listening to Zach Arnett on Monday, his press conference, I listened to the whole thing yesterday. He opened up by saying that these two teams are pretty similar. Y'all think that was an interesting comment? And do you agree with it?
And I talked to somebody from 24/7 that covers them a little bit earlier. It is kind of crazy, the similarities. They're also rotating through offensive linemen. They played 8 so far this season trying to figure things out there. Now, they've run the ball a whole lot better than South Carolina has, but yeah, so quite a few similarities between these two teams.
Quarterback play has not been as good.
No.
Yeah.
They actually have a quarterback controversy going on out there.
They do.
And their backup is apparently a guy Gamecock fans are somewhat familiar with.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Mike Wright, former Vandy.
Vandy.
Yeah.
That guy's fast.
And they'll play him some, and that brings, like you said, Wes, this is a different type of challenge, indeed. Right. Part of it is scheme. You'll see a couple different quarterbacks. Don't be fooled. It's still going to be a challenge for sure.
And we'll certainly dive more into Mississippi State as the week goes along. We'll hear a little bit more from what the players had to say yesterday. Speaking of the media, jump over to the defense coming up. You're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
It's time for kickoff, and the Believe podcast will get you ready for the new season.
If you don't dominate in the running game, you won't win this football game.
Believe has podcasts covering all 32 professional teams and many of your favorite college teams, too.
He was always kind of one step ahead of everybody.
Sideline to sideline, end zone to end zone.
He's been such a part of the fabric of this team, so closely associated with the city, with championship-level football.
Search BLEAV podcasts wherever you listen.
Yeah, like I said, I really enjoy being out there. I think Pup is getting better every single day. Pup and Bam, Bam Martin Scott's another guy that we can put in there. They're just keep building confidence for them, just to be able to provide the depth that we need. I think Debo played almost every single snap. I got 12 plays off, I think, so. We're definitely going to need them towards the back end coming in the SEC play now. You need more depth in that. You can't really maintain that as much as I want to. It's a physical game. So I think with them, it's just building up confidence, and, know where to be.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Tyler, Wes, and Chris along with you. That was the voice of Stone Blanton, Gamecock linebacker yesterday, talking to the media about the depth issues that we're having across the entire team, but one of the areas in particular is linebacker. As you mentioned, Debo Williams once again out there for every single snap on Saturday against Georgia, and that's fine for a one-game sample size, and you don't doubt those guys go out there and give it 110% every single time, but as you get through SEC play on a week-in, week-out basis, you're going to need that depth. You're going to need Pup Howard. You're going to need Bam Martin Scott to step up even more, give these guys a little bit of reprieve, and get some nice rotation going in there.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see, do we see more of a rotation starting this week? I tend to think we will, and you have to, because we saw this play out before. The fact that you are playing these guys so many snaps leads to an increased chance that they could get banged up just by the numbers of it, just by the math. And then what happens? You're playing the backup anyway.
Yep.
So I would much rather play the backup on my own terms than I would play the backup when I'm forced to play the backup. So I think that's something you have to look at starting this week. I understand against Georgia, you probably felt like every single possession was huge. And if there's a drop-off there, some positions more than others, you're saying we need our best out here this entire game. Now, does it eventually catch up to you? I think we saw that in the second half. But I think moving forward, getting Bam Martin Scott in there more at linebacker, bringing Pup Howard along, bringing along some of the younger defensive backs. In some ways, you made a move to get your best 11 on the field by moving DQ back to nickel. At the same time, that eats away at your depth, because instead of having these three guys who you're very comfortable with at safety, DQ, Nicky, and Jalen Kilgore, you've now spread them out to the two safety spots and the nickel spot. So finding some more depth there. Can Judge Collier continue to come on at cornerback? Does Vakari Swain or Emory Floyd come along? Can you bring some of those guys along as this season progresses and pick your times to put them in? I think is frankly one of the biggest keys to South Carolina's final 3/4 of the season.
And for the purposes of these first few games, that's why the loss of Mo Kaba has been so big. Imagine being able to play him. I think you had a great thought/theory, Wes, when you said, look, let's say you're going to play 70 defensive snaps in a game. even if Debo and Stone remain the starters for a portion of the year or the whole year, that means that Mo could have come in and given you 15 snaps at Mike, 15 snaps at Will, play 30 snaps and kind of take 15 snaps each off of those other guys. That would be huge because a healthy Mo, you probably would not have had a drop-off, and it could have been that he would have performed well enough to where he's back in the starting lineup as he was last season, and now you've got one of those other two guys coming off the bench as kind of a super sub. You didn't have that. You didn't have him to where you could bring along Bam Martin-Scott and Pup Howard, who, by the way, especially for Pup Howard, who is still a freshman, they missed some preseason practice time. So you kind of had a combination of all these different factors that have led to, plus the importance of these games, how these games went, how close they were, North Carolina and Georgia games specifically. You felt like as a staff you had to play those other guys, and they're capable, particularly Debo. I mean, he's played the most snaps of anybody at the linebacker position, even more than Stone. He's capable of doing it, but as Shane Beamer said, I think he said this after game one, it's not sustainable. So without Mo Kaba, what are your options? Well, it's continuing to bring those other two along, and there is still a progression for these guys, especially for Pup Howard as a freshman. And so what he's going to be, game 8, game 12 is not probably what he was game 1. And so it's important to continue, bringing those guys along there.
One more thing I want to play real quick. Nicky Minwari yesterday talking about management of his injury going forward. Here's what Nicky had to say.
Kind of hard trying to hold yourself back when, all I know is kind of like going hard. It's kind of hard doing that, but just the trainers and my coaches just telling me to be smart, make sure I'm taking care of my body more, like drinking a lot of water and staying in the treatment room. Like I live in there now, even if I'm not hurt, I'll just stay in there, just do what I can.
And similarly to Juice, when you're talking about something like a hamstring with Nicky Minwari, and obviously you want to be out there on the field as much as you can and one of your best players on defense, that's something that can get re-aggravated really, really easily. So you have to be careful about how you go about things with Nicky on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, we've talked about that, man. Hammies just can be tough to come back from because they feel just fine until you really push it. And then if you push it too hard, you've set yourself back another 2 or 3 weeks. So, he obviously was not 100% against Georgia, but at the same time, I didn't think he looked hobbled against Georgia. So I think luckily it appears he made it through that one without tweaking it or re-injuring it or anything like that. And you certainly hope as the next few weeks go along that he can get back closer and closer to 100%. But again, another situation where it's not ideal to have him have to play 80 snaps coming off of an injury as well.
Right. We'll certainly see what happens this weekend with those guys. Obviously, South Carolina has some pretty interesting names on their team. Tree Babalade, Stone Blanton, Pup Howard. Names in college football are always fun, especially when you have some very unique ones. Chris has an all-name team for Mississippi State that he'll share coming up. You're listening to the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Going to be on location the next couple days. We'll be out at our friends in Gold Line Framing in West Columbia tomorrow. Then Firehouse Subs in Casey on Friday. So certainly come by and see us if you can over the next 2 days. Very excited for that. Chris, as I mentioned before the break, there are a lot of great names in college football. I look forward to the all-name team every single year. It's very hard to top like General Booty out at Oklahoma. But apparently Mississippi State's had some interesting names over the years. What are some of the ones you unearthed?
Dakotas Crawford, just
Yeah.
a classic. Mississippi
Kool-Aid
State, though,
McKinstry.
Mississippi State is like underrated. So some teams will have a guy or two, right? Dakotas Crawford, General Booty. South Carolina's got a couple, right? Mississippi State every single year, they can field a roster of all names.
And it makes sense because a lot of kids come from Mississippi, like deep in Mississippi.
Oh,
We'll
yeah.
talk like quintessential Southern, either actual names or nicknames, those kind of things. It makes sense they would have some unique ones.
And they have some of the classics in college football, too. And they always have a bunch of very unique names, and then you've got sandwiched in between, like Fred Ross, right? That was
Will
Fred
Rogers.
Ross. Will Rogers, right? Fred Ross was a really good player at Mississippi State. Had that trick play against the Gamecocks in 2016. Think he caught a touchdown. You had the late Darunya Wilson, nicknamed Bear back in the day. And then a classic. I think this is the best possibly of all time, Pernell McPhee at Mississippi State. That is just a phenomenal name.
That is a good one.
But, all right, so Mississippi State this year, and I put this together looking through the depth charts to put together our star power feature on Gamecock Central, basically looking at past star rankings, kind of comparing them. Obviously, Mississippi State's running back, who just set the school record for receptions, 200 career receptions, Jaquavius Marks. That's a great name.
That's a good one.
Nickname Woody, so Woody Marks. Don't know where they got that from, but that's phenomenal. You also have Ledietrich Griffin. I can't even say it. Ledietrich Griffin.
They call it Tulu.
Do they?
Yeah, they call him Tulu.
That's right. Okay. What are these nicknames?
Tulu Griffin?
Yeah, Tulu Griffin.
That is a
They
good
call
name.
him that on the broadcast.
Okay, Tulu Griffin and Woody Marks.
That's A tier.
All right. An Orr on the depth chart at tight end. And this one may be tough to top. I'm going to try to get it. Jorquarius Spivey. Now, Geor apostrophe Quarious. Jorquarius Spivey.
Sounds right to me.
You've got Quatrevius Johnson along the offensive line. Another great name. Jaden Crumedy, not that great of a name. Jet Johnson at linebacker. Good linebacker name.
Better be fast.
Fantastic linebacker name. Although probably better as a kickoff returner.
Yes.
Yeah, like wide receiver type guy. Yeah.
And then here, let me submit this one. Final one. Esaias Furge. These are seriously the nicknames that I would put like when I was making on NCAA 14 and I'm creating my team, trying to come up with funny names. Me and my buddies would sit around laughing about them, like just cackling. Esaias Furge.
That's a good one.
There's nothing more to say. That is this year's Mississippi State all-name team. And I'm telling you, it's like clockwork, guys. Every single year, they have not just one submission to college football's all-name team. They have multiple. You could field an entire roster off these guys.
Yeah, and then, as you mentioned, some of the just generic names, Eric Taylor, John Lewis.
Is that like Coach Taylor?
Jordan Davis.
That is Eric Taylor, isn't it?
Yeah, Eric Taylor from Friday Night Lights.
Isaac Smith. Like, just some very generic ones mixed in there as well.
Nick Jones.
They got a Nick Jones?
They got Nick Jones on the I don't know if they call him Nicky. Nicky Jones on the offensive line.
Oh.
Cole Smith. Just regular names.
Cole Smith.
It's just always there's always this like
it's one of the other
contrast. Yes. Crazy name, crazy unique or no.
They're two quarterbacks, Will Rogers, Mike Wright. Those are pretty just plain names, I feel like.
So generic.
I feel like Mike Wright played for the Gamecocks in the mid-90s. Like, it just feels right.
Had a Mike West.
Yeah.
Remember him?
That wasn't mid-90s, though.
that was a little bit later.
He had an Anthony Wright.
He was pretty good. A1. He had a nickname.
He had a great nickname. I ran into him at camp a couple of years ago. I walked up to him. He didn't know I knew who he was. I said, "Hey, man, how far could you throw that football right now?"
I remember that. I was standing there.
Said, far enough.
Didn't you ask him from one knee, too?
I think so.
I think you asked him to drop. You know, everybody likes to drop to the knee and see how far they can chuck it.
Right.
Cannon.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Wow. From one knee?
What? He didn't do it.
He didn't do it.
But I'm just saying, back in the day.
I see.
Whoo. Maybe the strongest arm.
Now, could he throw it farther than Joe Milton, who throws it 90 yards, apparently?
Well,
I don't know.
He could throw it more accurate than Joe Milton.
Gosh. Yikes.
Seen the message boards already calling for a new starter in Knoxville.
That was
Nico.
quick.
Nico time?
Nico is the what they're going to be chanting this weekend, I guess.
And Mississippi State, as you alluded to earlier, Tyler, there are some people. Will Rogers has had to stand up there in the press conference and address that, right? He's gone from a dude who put up giant numbers last year. I was just telling Wes and I are sitting here doing film study during the breaks. and Will Rogers, I mean, part of it was LSU, but he has struggled so far this year. And you do have Mike Wright, who's definitely more of a runner, but it's what will we see this week? I'm kind of fascinated by it.
It's funny because who I talked to earlier was covering them for 24/7 Sports, and they were talking about, going into the season, people thought like he could touch Aaron Murray's like all-time numbers in the SEC, and now we're 3 weeks into the season, and people are calling for him to be replaced because Kevin Barbay's trying to run more of a run-based system, RPO type stuff with Will Rogers isn't fast. Mike Wright is, which makes people think he's a better fit to what they do.
Well, I got a very deep cut for you. Hopefully for South Carolina, it's not the reverse of 2001 when South Carolina, Mississippi State played in Starksville and had a backup Corey Jenkins come off the bench and spark their offense with a long touchdown run that ended up being the winning touchdown.
Yeah, we'll see. Again, coming up Saturday night, Gamecocks and Bulldogs. Will dive more into Mississippi State over the next couple days. We'll be out at Gold Line Framing tomorrow in West Columbia. Come by and see us. That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show coming up next here on The Game.
Former Navy SEAL Sean Ryan shares real stories from real people from all walks of life on The Sean Ryan Show. Guest Brandon Fugel.
Now, Skinwalker Ranch is the most Googled location in the entire world.
For whatever reason, we're seeing the highest level of UFO sightings and paranormal activity. And this has been going on for decades, if not millennia. And we're finally bringing it to the public's attention.
The Sean Ryan Show on YouTube or wherever you listen.